Hello, I'm Eric Landrum from the Psych Sessions Network and also a Season 3 co host of Teaching Matters, along with co host Dr. Rob McIntarfer from Lincoln Public Schools in Lincoln, Nebraska. We're pleased to bring you this collection of 10 episodes recorded from September 2021 through April 2022. Two episodes in Season 3 featured guests. In Episode 4, we speak with Casey Swanson from Plymouth High School in Canton, Michigan. And in Episode 10, we speak with Ginger Wickline from Georgia Southern University in Statesboro, Georgia. As usual, a wide range of topics are discussed across these 10 episodes. Here is just a sample: research methods, student mental health, hypothesis testing, fictions teachers tell themselves, self care tips, assessment chat, rubrics, AP psychology, IB psychology, high school teachers making connections with college teachers, understanding graphs, accreditation, rather than doing more, purposely doing less, the subjectivity of grading, study skills advice, modality switching during the semester, adapting to natural disasters in one's life, using storytelling purposely as a teaching strategy, the professional demeanor at conferences, improv for teachers, why oh why extra credit, STP's This Is How I Teach blog, hearing the diverse voices of teachers of psychology, and so much more. Please enjoy Season 3 of Teaching Matters from Psych Sessions. So, what matters in teaching today?
What does matter in teaching?
If
A
teaching
topic
matters, what matters in teaching?
a topic I thought of that's sort of old hat for us, but I don't know if we've gone this specific with it before. In the past, we've talked about assessment formats and we've talked about multiple choice items and limitations and promises of multiple choice items. And we've gone down that road, I think, conceptually. I can't remember if we ever got nitty gritty with how you assess at scale in your class. And now that I have a class and I have a very different scale, how I assess in my class. And I guess the general topic here would be assessing at scale without sacrificing your uh, teaching philosophy as much as you would want to.
Yeah, that's a great topic. And so I think I would start by saying that I as much as it sounds like I get carried away and preachy at times, I don't ever mean to say that people need to do things the way I do. I have, depending on who you talk to, either evolved or devolved over time into my teaching philosophy and practices. And scale for me these days, I'm the largest class I teach nowadays is about 90 upper division. The last time I taught like 250 would have been fall of 2009 when I taught 250 in general psych. I would love to get back into general psych, but I just haven't been able to for a number of reasons. I probably had 125 along the way, but that's about the largest I've gotten into.
That's plenty big.
For us at Boise State in psychology and psychological science, that's mid-size. Our largest lecture halls are 289. So for us, that's large.
Yeah. Well, I think that's plenty big to have implications for how you assess.
Definitely. I mean, University of Washington, University of Oregon, there are lecture halls, I believe 500, 600. I think University of Toronto, University of Michigan, they've got lecture halls that hold 1,000. So I mean,
Wow.
yeah, you can get a University of Florida 1,200. I mean, I think there's larger lecture halls. I think factual multiple choice test and quiz items can have a targeted use. If you want to know what a student knows, if you want to use it for a readiness assessment, if you want to use it for like in Poll Everywhere or Top Hat, where you want to know if a student prepared that day and you want a little snippet, I think it makes good sense. I do think though educators sometimes over rely on three tests and a cumulative final, all multiple choice, when they feel like that's their only option in a large enrollment course.
Yeah, and that's kind of habit and culture and just our history, and we end up teaching the way we were taught. I'm curious in your class that doesn't seem huge for your life, the 90-person class, what kinds of assessments are you able to do even in a class of 90?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Again, I'm at a point in my career where I just do it. And
Mhm.
this might not work for people who are at different institutions where there's a different culture. It might not be wise for someone to do it who's earlier in their career. They have different needs and they have to balance different career objectives. So this is my capstone class. And we've talked about it a little bit before, but not everybody listens to every episode, so it's gonna be repetition. So, they will do a podcast, a PSA, public service announcement podcast assignment. Well, they'll write a short script, and then they'll record that as an MP3 file, and they'll upload those, and they'll follow rubrics, and I'll grade those. They'll each prepare a history of psychology infographic where they'll have to use evidence informed citations through PsycInfo, as well as some popular press stuff. They'll follow a format that I give them that has to be within the realm of 18 inches wide by 42 inches long, following some best practices from infographics, and they'll each prepare an infographic. They'll each participate on a consultation team. And they'll have a client in the Department of Psychological Science. Well, they'll work in a group for about 8 weeks during the semester where they will meet with the client. They'll have a deliverable. They'll have a report they have to give the instructor where they'll get some real world practice applying what they already know to write a report to help a client with a problem. And then finally, they'll do a kind of a pre-post beginning of semester, end of semester upgrading of a resume or a CV. So they get something practical and applied. Now, and so those are the basic deliverables or artifacts of my capstone class. This semester has 83 students. So now I do use for when students come to class, I do use some multiple choice on poll EV to kind of take attendance, so to speak. But it's very light and airy and fluffy and fun. Um, but but so there's
That's
only
what it
really
says on Eric's business card, by the way. It says light and airy and
yeah, if I
fluffy and
used
fun.
to have business cards, that's if I had them, that's what they would have. Yeah, just like my brain, empty, light, airy, and fun. Uh, so so there's not a lot of assignments, there's not one a week, let's say.
Mhm.
And they take me quite a while to grade and return. But I like that those students are leaving the course with stuff they could show. They could show an employer an infographic. They could show an employer a podcast audio and a script. They could show an employer an improved resume or a CV. They could show an employer a shared consultation technical report that they created. They've got lots to write about if they choose to on their resume about what they gain skill wise in that class. So, but that works for me in my capstone in the context of Boise State. I would not prescribe this to be the way other people should do it.
I agreed, and also credit where credit is due. I think it's, pretty incredible that you're able to do that many deliverables, like practical portfolio items in a class of 90 because I think I know boy, in high school teachers, when they're advising each other about workload, I don't know that many psychology teachers who would take on evaluating that many deliverables from that many students.
Well, thank you. I've been doing this for years, and so I've been doing it for a long time, and so I do have rubrics that I use, and with time and practice comes efficiency. Now, it still takes me a boatload long amount of time, but that's my job.
Mhm.
And that's, the what's the running gag? That's why I get paid the big bucks. And so that's the value that I see providing to students.
I think that's awesome, and the flip side of that, and, almost diametrically the flip side of that, the scale of my classroom is so small now compared to anyone I talk to and anything that I'm used to. I'm finding the opposite end of the spectrum on scale having its own challenges, mostly having a whole hell of a lot of advantages, but having its own challenges. So just a reminder to everybody, I'm back in a classroom for the first time in a long time. I've been a public district office administrator for 16 years, and I'm just now teaching my first class again called AP Research, and I have a grand total of 4 students. So
So Rob,
it
how's that going? Can
it's
you
fun.
give an update of where you are in the class and where your students are in their process?
Yeah, and just really briefly for everybody, it's basically a research methods class. The advanced placement research class, as designed by College Board, students have an entire year to learn how to do a literature review, choose a research question, identify appropriate methodology for the research question, design a method section, gather data and analyze data in a results section, and then write their conclusions. And they put it all together in about a 5,000 word fairly publication ready journal article, hopefully a publication ready journal article. And I turn that in at the end of the year. So instead of a traditional AP test, students turn in this paper, and that paper is scored by readers at the end of the year, given a rubric.
Oh, wait a second. Time out. I didn't know about
Yeah.
that part.
Yeah.
Okay, so they don't sit for an AP exam
Nope.
where they take 66% multiple choice and 33% FRQs.
Nope. They turn in a paper, and there's also an oral presentation requirement where the student does a 20-minute presentation, basically conference style, and it gets videoed. That's kind of curious though. The teacher scores that one. The College Board provides a rubric and the teacher scores that one. And the teacher uploads those scores and then can be audited, but there's no independent scoring of those scores. And
Well,
that's also included in the overall student composite score.
let's hope your table leader doesn't double check your
Right.
scoring of those. So, are your 4 students collaborating on one paper?
Nope, 4 different papers. We are all collaborating on a practice topic because AP research teachers were not supposed to provide individual feedback, like individual sort of pointed feedback on student projects, because the paper is taking the place of an AP test. So they they want teachers to provide general feedback and obviously instruction to students, but they were trying to ensure that all the student work on the paper is student work rather than teacher work.
Okay, but if you're replicating what a research methods class would look like in college, yeah, and I've taught research methods,
Mhm.
you know, you would give general advice to the whole class about here's what you do in the methods section, here's what you do in the results section. But as the class went on, they would hand in the methods. I would grade the methods, give it back, and then they would be expected to revise into a final draft. You would give them specific feedback about their method section and their results section.
Yes, so in that way, this experience is different than a college research methods class, and this is the part of the class that I'm maybe least comfortable with. I understand the College Board rationale. I'm not sure if it really holds up, although I understand it. I think this is their way to try to ensure that the paper that gets turned in is truly the work of the student rather than the work of an adult assisting the student. So the guidance that we receive during training is definitely read your students' papers and give overall advice to the whole group. Like, I read all of your literature reviews, and some of you should go back and check your parenthetical citations. You should go back and check how much summary you're providing of the studies and use of lengthy quotes. You're not supposed to sit someone down, sit an individual student down and say, hey, right here, change this word to this word.
Wow.
Yeah,
So you're not even
it's
supposed to give them back their Word file, and I would use Word, not Google
sure,
Docs like you are,
sure.
in track changes? That's
No,
what college professors do.
yeah, yep. So I hear that, and it's going to frustrate me. It's going to frustrate me increasingly as I start to see more student work when I know there are some really simple little fixes that I could give individuals that would help improve their
Yeah.
work. On
How
the other side,
yeah.
I don't have a better solution, although this isn't a perfect solution, but I don't have a better idea to try to make sure that the student work is truly student work. I was involved in another similar project that remember the Westinghouse Science Awards that turned into the Intel Science Awards? They
Oh,
were a high school.
vaguely,
Yeah.
vague.
So they're high school. It's a high school, basically big science fair. And instead of posters, they produce papers, and they're a really big deal. They're a national competition, and I helped judge the psychology ones for a while. And as I read those papers, I had a really hard time believing that some of those papers were actually written by the high school student. Most of them were partnered with a university professor, and the level of access that those students had and just the level of writing in some of those papers, I really started to get concerned that it represented student work, not adult work. So I don't know that there's a great solution for this. This current solution of not the AP research teacher not providing individual feedback on the project, I don't think is a great solution either, but I don't have a better one right now.
Well, I think there's a couple things. Not that you asked me to problem solve this
Please
for
do.
you,
Yeah.
but heck, we're chatting
Mhm.
and we're recording, so what the heck?
And we know the College Board listens to us all the time, so
Really? What, are they
sure.
having trouble sleeping at night? What the heck is wrong with them? So I think one solution could be, you know, the you know, students could keep an archival copy of their
Mm.
original first draft
Yeah.
to show their pure work.
Yeah.
And then when I do this in research methods, I give them track changes. And oftentimes it's comments. I'm not actually fixing their document. And
Mhm.
then my students have to be the ones to take the initiative. When I put in the comments, this is a pathetic fallacy error. You need to fix this.
Mhm.
I've taught them in class how to do that, but
Yeah.
they have to be the ones to take the initiative. I mean,
Yeah.
you could have students turn in multiple draft copies of what their original work was, what your comments and suggestions were, and what they submitted out as a final draft.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work, but it would address your concern of whose final work is this really? Is this,
I
yeah, really student voice,
Mhm.
or is this adult voice
Mhm.
who's intervened?
I like that sort of an archive. You turn in an archival history of the paper, and I think that probably would be better evidence that it's student work. That this takes us back to scale, which is where you and I started.
Yeah.
The College Board always has to think about that. But I signed up. I don't know if it's a good idea or a bad idea. I'll tell you later. But did sign up. I signed up to be an AP research reader at the end of the year. So instead of doing the AP psychology reading like I have done in the past, um, I signed up to be an AP research reader. We'll see if they choose me or not. But that reading is different than the AP psychology reading. So at the AP psychology reading, you're assigned to one free response question. That's a number of paragraphs, usually maybe 2 pages of student writing, and you burn through 700 to 1,000 of those over the course of the reading. Some people are faster and they go through a lot more. At the AP research reading, you get paper after paper, and each of the papers is about 5,000 words. And I don't know how many of those each reader is expected to make it through.
Yeah, those are gonna be long days.
Yeah, it'll be
But
interesting.
you'll probably be chief reader of that in about 5
Yeah,
years, I would imagine.
right. But if I have the opportunity to give feedback at the AP research reading, I might recall this conversation and ask if there's a better way, if there's a better solution to the problem of can we feel confident that this is student work rather than adult work.
Yeah, I think the other solution, which you will be much less comfortable with because you're actually a good person who's going to heaven. I think the other solution would be, especially with your group of 4, you know that you're not supposed to give direct instruction. So in your class, you could say, all right, so there were some mistakes about multiple authors being cited parenthetically in your opening lit reviews. So
Mhm,
I want to teach the class about how to do that properly. Here's
mhm.
an example of where it was done wrong.
Yeah,
And you just
and
pull it from a student's paper.
yeah.
Exactly. And so one of your 4 students will probably notice. They don't even have to self-reveal that they
Yeah,
see their mistake and, "Oh, I got them out they're out of order alphabetically," and you
yeah,
teach them within parentheses, they should be in order by first author's last name, and now you're telling everybody the same thing, so you're
yep,
not giving anybody individualized instruction,
yeah.
but the person who made the mistake is getting individualized instruction.
Yeah, and that's pretty much the route that I've gone. As a matter of fact, just this morning, their current task. Well, let me back up one step. So to try to solve this problem or accommodate for this trickiness of not being able to give individual feedback on their project, I had them we went through a process of choosing a class topic and then did a class annotated bibliography, and then we did a class research question. And right now they took a swing at taking a section of the class annotated bibliography and turning that into a paragraph from the class lit review. And then I looked over their work on the class lit reviews. And just this morning, I gave them feedback on some great things I saw across their work and then some things to work on. So this morning, we talked about when to use et al. And how to use et al. And how you make the choice of putting the researcher's name outside the parentheses toward the beginning of a sentence or inside the
Good
parentheses
for
toward the
you.
end. So it's basically following the advice you just gave, looking across student work and giving more general feedback. But it gets to the point of ridiculousness sometimes because there's only 4 students in the room. So if I notice it in 2 of them and I give general feedback, those 2 know who that's pointed
Right.
at. So I can only go so far.
Do your 4 students get along?
Yeah, they're really good. They're wonderful students. They're fantastic high school researchers. They get along well together. We're going to be, and that's a really good thing because they're going to be relying on their peers for peer feedback a lot later on. So when they turn in their actual draft of their real project literature review, I will set aside time in class for them to give each other feedback. I did that on their research questions, and it was one of those dream teacher days because I had them up in a circle towards the front of the room, and I was in the back doing something else, but I could hear them, and I told them that I was going to listen in, and they were giving each other often. They were giving each other exactly the feedback that I wanted to give them on their research topics.
I don't know if you're comfortable doing this, but occasionally, um, set up your cell phone and just hit record
Oh yeah,
and ask permission
sure,
afterwards if you could
sure.
use that because
Yeah.
those can be, or even just take a couple pictures
Hmm.
because I think those can be telling, if you're giving a talk someday somewhere about this, or if you're just trying to tell other teachers about
Yeah.
what this experience is like, a little snippet of video or just a few still pictures can be really helpful. I do this in class sometimes when my capstone students are really into something and they're really working in groups. I'll just get out my camera and take a couple pictures and just tuck them away.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So the scale. So with your 80 to 100 students, you think about how many deliverables you can actually look through and evaluate with a rubric. In my AP with my AP 4 wonderful AP researchers, it's basically all excuses are removed or all scale excuses are removed. So then my challenge in this very small class is I can kind of ask them to produce anything because I can get through evaluating anything. So it's a different kind of teaching problem to have. Does that make any sense?
Yeah,
I've
it is.
never had this freedom before.
Well, and your students, I think there's a lot more pressure for your students. There's nowhere to
Mhm,
hide.
mhm.
You can't go to class and sit in the back row of 20 or 25 in a high school class and just zone out and, "Oh, man, I'm hungover today. I'm just gonna zone out and sit in the back," and what would be Dr. Mac? What's the phrase?
It's that's what I went with. It felt weird, but yeah, I'm doing Dr. Mac. I
Dr.
used to be
Mac.
Mr. Mac in high school, and now I'm Dr.
Hey,
Mac.
man, you earned it. Go
Yeah.
for it.
Shout out to Loretta McGregor. She and I are Dr. Mac and Dr. Mac. We've taken photos before.
The Big Mac, Double Mac.
No one's ever confused Loretta and me as Dr. Mac and Dr. Mac. We look slightly different.
Well, you know what? I'm just gonna let listeners use Google and Facebook to figure that out, but no hints here. You know, in a class of 4, you just can't hide, you can't,
Mhm.
um, there's lots of pressure. If one person doesn't feel like talking, the other 3 really do have to pick up the slack. That's why I asked if they get along
Yeah.
because there's a decent chance that some meaningful friendships could form
Mhm.
between those 4 students, and
Yeah, I hope so.
some bonds could actually form
Mhm.
between the 5 of you.
Yep. Yep. Here's hoping.
Uh,
It's also the first AP research class in the city. So,
oh, that's very cool. So, you're collecting data, and so I don't wanna open up, uh, thus can old worms. So you're collecting data, I'm assuming with human participants at some
Yeah,
point?
potentially. So they're just finishing, well, not finishing. They're working on their literature reviews right now, and that the end of that is supposed to be an identified gap in the literature.
Of course.
And if the timing can work out, I want them to choose a research methodology based on that literature gap. I'm not sure that timing is going to perfectly work out. They may have to choose research methodology before they've solidified the literature gap. But yes, I suspect that most of the methodologies they choose, they'll have human participants.
And how will you give them an IRB experience?
Great question. Luckily, in my district, the office that I work in, assessment and evaluation, our office handles research review for the district. So
Oh,
if Dr. Landrum at Boise State wanted to gather data in Lincoln Public Schools, you would submit an IRB proposal. We don't call it an IRB because we're not legally an IRB. You submit a Lincoln Public Schools research review proposal to our office. We review it. It's a similar process to the IRB. And then we ask you questions, and then you get the stamp of approval and an official approval letter. So my students will have a mini version of that. We've got a slightly expedited process for student projects, but a lot of the same procedures will be in place.
will your students be doing research, you think, on other students potentially younger than 18?
Potentially. And in Nebraska, we've got an extra complication because our age of majority is 19 for research purposes. I know. Yeah. It makes it really tough on college researchers. I've been in the position in college before of giving college students parent consent letters, which they just love.
Yeah. Well, if your district does not adhere to that stern rule,
Yeah.
then your 4 researchers actually have a real advantage.
Yeah. We will do, because the results will be shared outside the district. That's the line that we draw. Their parental consent will be involved.
Oh,
So
you will make them do parental consent.
we will. Yeah. Anytime, if it's just for in-class use, we say,
Right,
parent consent isn't needed,
right,
but since
educational
this
uses only,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
but this will be sent over the college board and might be able to get around that if I really tried, but also the college board doesn't own the work that these students turn in. So these students could turn their work in for publication elsewhere, and I'd like them to have that opportunity. So parental consent will give them that opportunity.
And why not think about something like a Rocky Mountain Psychological Association?
Mhm. Yeah, that'd be interesting, huh?
I mean, not only a, college board, but a conference presentation
Yeah.
and then a scholarly publication I mean,
Yeah,
I think of submitting it to the college board more as a technical communication,
it is.
technical
Yeah.
report. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't
it
think
is.
that
Yeah.
precludes any of the other outlets I just mentioned.
Agreed.
I mean,
Yeah, agreed.
and maybe for Nebraska, it might make more sense to do Midwestern Psych, but my bias would be Rocky Mountain Psych.
Yeah. At least 2 of the projects will be psychology research in nature. 2 of them might be slightly different, but yeah, that's a really good idea. There also used to be a high school journal. I don't know if it's still active. There used to be something called the Whitman Journal of High School Psychology.
There's
Where they
multiple high school
Are there?
outlets. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, Whitman yeah, was that Craig Gruber that did
It
Whitman?
was. Mhm.
Yeah, and I don't know if that one in particular, but there are high school and undergraduate student, journals that might consider high school submissions.
Cool.
There are certainly student-oriented journals out there.
Yeah. So we started with classroom scale and implications for assessment, and you've got what I would consider pretty large classrooms, even if they're not in your context, and you're having students do these a certain set number of pretty major, I'd call them performance tasks.
Yeah, that's a fine label, sure.
Yeah. And then at my very, very small scale, I basically have almost daily performance tasks where my 4 students are turning in something that shows me their thinking for that day. And I'm using that mostly to give group feedback and plan what I do next. So the advantage is it's pretty nimble. I can look at what they did and plan something completely different for the next day.
Well, and that strikes me as a variation of just-in-time teaching. I mean,
Yeah.
where you're
Yeah.
getting that feedback and, I think formally in just-in-time teaching, you you get the feedback the night before or the
Mm,
hour before, and then you
yeah,
adjust on the fly. You're just getting it day of and then
yeah,
adjusting for the next day, which
yeah,
makes really good sense. I mean, if you think about it, when clickers first came out, people really started to pay attention to this. If you showed a factual slide, on the display and 25% of your class got a factual item correct, could you really just keep lecturing?
right.
You really should stop and
Mhm,
explain and probably retest.
right,
Well, that's what you've built in, right? I mean,
yeah,
you're checking in on knowledge comprehension and skill acquisition, and
yeah,
if they're not getting it, you're adjusting and coming back the next day and going, "Okay, well, we kind of flubbed up together yesterday. Let's see how we're doing today." Or, "Wow, you guys really rocked it yesterday. Let's push ahead. I wasn't quite ready to do this, but you're rocking and rolling. Let's do this." You know?
yeah, it's effectively turned into in K-12 what ends up getting called a mastery learning approach. I don't know if that
Yes,
term is the same. Yeah,
absolutely.
there's really no excuse for me to move on if there's a student who isn't showing mastery of something on the previous task.
Right. Right. I
Yeah,
mean, research methods is a class where mastery makes sense because you really can't do the methodology skills until you understand the foundational operational definitions and how to.
I'm so glad you used that term. We spent 2.5 days on operational definitions. We just hammered operational definitions.
Yeah, well, there's plenty of seniors in college that don't really understand it,
Yeah,
Rob. I'm
yeah,
sorry, Dr. Mack. Yeah, there's plenty of people who don't understand, and then, you dig into the nominal ordinal interval ratio
yeah.
and how
We're
you
coming up to
measure
that.
and how that measurement directly links to your statistical method, and if you understand nominal ordinal interval ratio, you are miles ahead in your selection of t-test, ANOVA,
Yep.
correlation, chi-square,
Yep,
all
they
linked.
they don't quite realize how much math is coming, but they'll find out when we get to quantitative analysis.
Yeah, and the thing is, and a lot of people have math anxiety, so it's nothing
Uh-huh.
to laugh at, nothing to make a joke
Yeah,
about, but
yeah,
it's it's really not about the math.
right.
The math's not the hard part. At least for our students, the hard part is knowing to knowing when to use what statistic, and
Mhm.
then knowing what the output means.
Right,
Knowing how to properly interpret what SPSS or R or even
right.
Excel is telling you.
And one of the things they're getting glimmers of right now is that will pay off when we get to that point. We spent time towards the beginning comparing across the disciplines. So, across,
Oh,
because this isn't just a psychology AP research, they can do research in any field. So, we looked at humanities fields and then natural science fields and social science fields. And what constitutes the nature of proof in each of those fields? How do they back up their claims? And they've got a glimmer of an idea right now that when you're talking about proof in some of the fields, you're really talking about probability because there's always a chance that you're wrong, and that chance is less than 100%. The chance is more than 100% that you're wrong. So I'm hoping that pays off when we get to concepts like statistical significance and effect size and things like that.
well, how did you teach that about all the other fields other than psychology?
It wasn't incredibly thorough, so it was more of an introduction, so I did a little bit of background research and tried to come up with categories of different fields, and then we made a big table, and it was a series of questions of what are the general research topics? What are some examples of research topics that this field would address? Go out and find 3 sources. What were the research questions from those 3 sources? Looking at those 3 sources, are they mostly doing qualitative work or quantitative work or mixed methods work? Can you tell how they analyze the qualitative or the quantitative data? Look at their conclusion sections. What are they basing those conclusion sections on? So, kind of skimming the surface, but really what they needed to come out with from there was different fields establish claims or back up claims differently.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. Yeah, I go on a tirade about in psychology, we never prove anything. and that they
Mhm.
should actually never use the word prove in any
Yeah.
manuscript ever.
Yeah.
We only
Yep.
we only
Agreed.
disprove. We never
Yeah.
prove.
The the theme of the class is humans are easy to fool. That's what we started with on day 1, and we repeat that at least once a week, and I've tried to bring in several examples of it. The latest example turned out to be a pretty cute example that I got from an elementary school librarian, and she sent me a lesson plan that she's doing with 3rd grade students, and this is a media literacy lesson plan because 'cause they've got about 4 or 5 books in the library about crocodiles and plovers. So there's a famous Tommy DePaulo book, and then there's a whole bunch of other elementary kids books about crocodiles and how wonderful it is that there are these birds called plovers. And crocodiles will sit on the bank and they'll open their mouth, and there's a symbiotic relationship between crocodiles and plovers. These little birds will come down and feed off of the debris and bugs and stuff in crocodiles' mouths. And it's a wonderful story of animal friendship and
Mhm.
symbiotic relationship, and nature is wonderful. And this elementary school librarian, after doing a little bit of digging, found out that that is a much disputed fact, or that is a much disputed claim. For a long time, many people have been repeating the idea that plovers clean crocodiles' teeth. It's apparently really hard to find evidence that plovers clean crocodile teeth. So they have 3rd grade students dig into a little bit and do a little bit of elementary, at least, is this a true thing or not? Well, after doing this with one class, these 3rd graders got motivated enough that they kids can get fired up, and they had a book, and they said, "Well, we need to write to this author to tell her she might be wrong." So the librarian helped them write to the publisher,
Oh my
and the
gosh.
publisher sent this to the author, and the author responded politely and said, Wow, this is fascinating. I wrote to these biologists about this, asking them if the crocodile plover claim is a myth or not. And here's the evidence that I found that it's not a myth. One source from 1979, another source from 1954, another anecdote from a biologist who said the quote was, "As far as I know, this is not a myth. But thank you very much. I'm going to include your example when I give book talks as an example of how important critical thinking is." So that part is a pretty happy ending.
Yeah.
But I showed those that response to my AP researchers, and I was very, very proud because they immediately jumped to a concept that we talked about earlier, which was confirmation bias.
Yeah.
The publisher and the author were looking for evidence that the crocodile plover myth, that there is evidence for the crocodile plover myth. And that's how the question was framed to the experts, and that's what they found.
Absolutely. And plus it's okay to publish the book, just label it fiction.
Sure. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Just truth in advertising. I Humans are easy to fool. That could be the title
That's
of
the
this
theme.
episode. Rob, it made me think early on in the internet, um, websites were very basic looking. I don't know if you
Mhm.
you did much programming.
A little bit.
There were some programming tools. I'm trying to remember what it was like hot dog or dog
Oh,
HTML or something like
oh,
that.
wow. Yeah, I don't know that
Anyway,
one.
there was one, but I s- I don't know how I got onto it, but I stumbled across like presidential history,
Hmm.
and I was so excited. You're gonna laugh right away, but I didn't figure it out. But I stumbled across like a Thomas Alva Edison website, and I was playing, and someone had taken some of the oldest recordings that were on wax and some of the cylinders that Edison had recorded of earliest recordings and put them in a form that could be played digitally. So you
Cool.
could hear Edison's voice that he had recorded and some of the earliest recordings. And then I kept poking around this website. I fell for it, right? Humans are easy to
Mm.
fool. And someone had posted in a very similar looking website that looked very realistic an actual recording of Abraham Lincoln. Not the
That's
Gettysburg
great.
Address,
Right.
not something that obvious, but
Sure.
an actual recording of his voice. And I remember going, "Oh my god, I've never heard Lincoln's voice,"
Yeah.
you know, and listened to it. and it was scratchy and warbly, just like you would expect, right?
Yeah.
And then started thinking, well, let's see, sound and Edison,
Mhm.
1880s, 1890s at the very earliest, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, Abraham Lincoln dies April of 1865.
Yeah.
Ah, crap.
Dang it.
Humans are
That's such a
easy
great
to
example.
fool.
That's such a great example because you have that historical context knowledge, so you're able to think your way out of that. Somebody who doesn't have a good timeline in their head isn't able to think their way out of that being fooled.
But I was so excited. I mean, how
Yeah.
cool would that be to
Yeah.
hear Lincoln's voice?
Yeah.
You know, an amazing figure in our history,
Yeah.
American history, and
That's a cool example. I may search and see if that's still out there. That's a neat one.
I'll yeah, I would bet it is, and if you see the website, it's gonna look rickety, it's gonna look like
Okay.
one of the first websites, and you see these sometimes. Somebody put a lot of work into an early website, and they've just never updated it for a modern
Sure.
look.
Right.
It's comprehensive AF, right? It's just
Yeah.
comprehensive. This is what
Neat.
it looked like, and there was just a simple link, and it sounded great. It sound
That's cool.
you know how someone can make a movie look old with the
Yeah.
lines, the black and
Sure.
white, and
Yeah.
they can make it sound like the projector,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Someone had done the sound effects work beautifully.
That's cool. Fact checking or checking the validity of online sources or claims is a big topic in K-12 right now. I don't know how big a topic that is in higher ed.
Um,
Um,
I think it's an important topic for like our librarians who teach,
mhm,
digital literacy,
mhm.
information literacy. I think when you dive into the disciplines, I think it matters to people who teach the research methods, the writing
Yeah.
skills stuff. When I have books that I update about writing skills, there's
Mhm.
usually a chapter or a section of a chapter on updated versions of the app test,
Yep.
and things like that. It's a real skill set. Susan Nolan, a dear friend of ours,
Mhm.
has she has some great slides in a presentation where she'll show two kind of side by side images of similar websites and ask the audience to detect which one's fake.
I think I've seen that. Now you're reminding me. I think I saw that presentation
Yeah,
once.
it's she does such a good job. Well, on
Neat.
everything that she does, but um and so it's a skill set that we all need as humans
Uh-huh.
because
Yeah.
you know, just like you said, the confirmation bias, we tend to go out and look for things that confirm what we already believe. I think, we're recording this October of 2021. We are learning how Facebook tends to feed us what we want. And
Mhm.
there's a financial incentive for them to give us what we want and to help us become more combative from what I've been reading.
Agreed. And a shout out to there's a group, the Stanford History Education Group. They have been producing really good history materials, history curriculum for a long time. They decided to tackle the online reasoning or checking online reasoning, and they tackled it in what I think is a pretty potentially important empirical way. So there, if anybody wants to find it, if you look up Civic Online Reasoning or CORE, COR, and then Stanford History Education Group, it'll be the first thing that comes up. They based they now have a curriculum that they'll send out to high schools, and they based it on some early research where they found websites with questionable claims, and then they found some samples of high school students, high school teachers, I believe, college teachers from different disciplines, and then they got a group of fact checkers for newspapers. And they basically did a task analysis. They just looked at how those different groups tried to check the validity of a claim on a website.
Hmm.
And what they think they found is that fact checkers do it differently than everybody else. It didn't really matter if it was a high school student or a college professor. They didn't do what fact checkers did. And then they described what fact checkers do. And they are saying that it's significantly different than what we've been teaching with the crap test, that the crap test might be in important ways outdated.
Yeah, actually, there was the Journal of Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, not the one in
Mm,
psychology. I think there was an article about that I saw
Oh,
today.
oh, cool.
So the fact checkers in theory have a better technique or more thorough technique?
It led to, empirically, it seemed to lead to faster and more valid checking of online claims. And the major difference was what they called lateral reading versus vertical reading. Turns out almost everybody else, not fact checkers, when they're checking the validity of an online claim, they'll read that one site kind of top to bottom very carefully, and they'll stay within that one site. They'll check to see if it's a nonprofit or a for profit. They'll check to see if there's academic sources in that site. They'll check to see if there's evidence on that site to support the claims within that site. What apparently fact checkers do is immediately lateral reading, which is they open up a new tab and they start looking for outside information about that website. Who owns that website?
Well,
What is the background of the people who
sure.
own that website? And then they'll use that lateral reading information and then go back to the original piece of information and interpret that in light of what they know about them. And Wikipedia is commonly used. So they'll laterally read, they'll find the source of the website, they'll jump out to Wikipedia. If there's a Wikipedia entry, they'll get an idea of what the source is like and use that before they vertically read on the source.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would gently say, maybe this is my own patting myself on the back bias,
Uh-huh.
is that if I'm reading a source that I'm skeptical about,
Uh-huh.
I may not have to jump out because I already know about I
Yeah,
may not, so if I'm reading it and it's from the Washington group, I'm making that up.
sure. Sure.
Um, I may not have to open up a separate window and go Google the
Sure.
Washington group because I already know about them. I
Right. So
already
you've got background knowledge that basically allows you to laterally read without laterally reading.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or if someone is saying that 80% of psychology majors can't get jobs, well, I
Right.
already know from other background sources that the unemployment rate for a United States undergraduate in psychology is about 6%. So
Right.
I know that the claim in the original is false without having to open up another tab, so to speak.
Right.
So,
And they're mostly their materials have examples, real life examples of websites that are incredibly well funded, so they're really well produced. And just by looking at the website itself, you can't really tell what the agenda is. So in that case, lateral reading turns out to be essential.
well, I think you've made a good point that I should acknowledge, which is I can only do that in areas of my expertise.
Right.
And in areas that are not in my expertise, I could very well be swayed by a very professional looking website if I didn't do the lateral reading.
Right.
I think novices should probably do the technique you're referring to, that lateral reading.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we get swayed by bright, shiny looking objects.
Yeah. Yeah, novices, and that has nothing to do with age and all to do with expertise. It's just what your field is and what fields you have enough rich non-content knowledge in order to not be
Oh,
fooled.
I actually, Rob would say that sometimes it does have something to do with age. And I'm going to go in
Yeah.
the reverse direction you were thinking. I think
Yeah.
older adults looking at websites may sometimes be more easily fooled
Yeah, you could be.
by
Yeah.
websites because they may not be as savvy internet
Yeah.
users. You were
Yeah.
trying to protect one stereotype. I wasn't going there. I'm going to go the other way.
Well, that was backed up by the empirical work behind this civic online reasoning curriculum too. They in fields that weren't their fields of expertise, college professors were as easily fooled as high school students.
Of course we are,
Yeah.
and so I tell this to students anytime they'll listen. In a very and this is a good way to end. In a
Sure.
very narrow slice of psychology, not even science, but in psychology, I know a lot. In an
Right.
incredibly narrow slice of psychology, I actually do know a lot.
Yep.
In the rest of the world, I am dumb as a doorknob. But it but people have this halo effect, right?
Right.
Dr. Mac, Dr.
Yeah.
Landrum,
Right.
"Oh, you're a doctor." Who was it yesterday? Someone in my department was making the joke, you know, no one's ever on a plane and goes, "Doctor, doctor, we need assistance," and asking for us, right?
Right.
No one on the plane ever goes, "Doctor, doctor, is there someone who could help me with an abstract and a 10-page paper in APA format? Stat." Nobody ever
Right.
does that.
Nope. It'll never happen to us. Curses.
Curses foiled again. Bam!
Agreed.
Pow! All right, Dr. Mac.
This is great, Dr. Landrum.
Thank you, my friend.